ahead and get started. Okay, so hello everyone. I'm Janine, which most of you probably know this. I'm the events programming manager at Meetup, and welcome to another Meetup Live event. Today we're joined with special guest Taniqua Martin. She is the host of the Black Fashion History podcast, and we're going to have a lesson on fashion history. Throughout this event and after the event, you will understand the impact of Black culture and fashion, hear the untold stories of Black creatives, and learn how to support up and coming stars in the fashion industry. And yeah, we're so excited for this event to support Black History Month. And I'm going to go over the event guidelines before I move on to the agenda, and Taniqua takes it away. So this event is being recorded. So if you have to leave early, don't worry, you'll be able to access a recording of this event, or if you want to rewatch it on our blog at meetup.com/blog. Because it's a webinar format, you will not appear in the video. You will only see Taniqua and myself, and everyone is muted. Again, because it's a Zoom webinar format, you can only hear Taniqua and myself, although Taniqua is muted right now, but you'll be able to hear her shortly. The chat has been disabled. We love hearing from you, and we ask that you please submit your questions in the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen. And thanks to Zoom, closed captioning is available. You can turn it on just by clicking on the live transcription icon at the bottom of your screen as well, and select your preference. So for introduction, which I'm doing right now, opening remarks, guidelines, agenda, and then I'm briefly going to introduce Taniqua. Then she is going to take over and walk you through a timeline of Black fashion. And we are going to come back after that and go over some of the Q&A that you submitted. So please, again, I encourage you to share your questions. We'd love to answer them. All right, so it's now my turn to introduce Taniqua Martin. She is a fashion researcher, content creator, and the host of Black Fashion History podcast. The underlying themes of her work are highlighting the experiences of Black people across the diaspora. Did I say that right? Celebrating the accomplishments of Black professionals in the fashion industry, educating communities, and providing much needed representation. Her work celebrating the unsung Black heroes of fashion and expertise in Black fashion culture has been highlighted in various publications like Vogue and Refinery 29 UK. Thank you so much for coming on Meetup Live. We are so excited to have you, and so excited for everything that you're going to share and that we're going to learn. I am going to, oh my God, yeah. So I'm going to get off the screen so that you can take it away and we can learn.
Well, thank you, Janine, and the Meetup team for having me. I'm really excited. Happy Black History Month, everybody. I'm excited to talk to you all today about one of my favorite topics, obviously, because I have a podcast about it, but the influence of Black culture on fashion. I'm going to share my screen, and we're going to hope that Zoom continues to cooperate and we don't have any hiccups. All right. Now I hope everybody can see my screen. Those are the infamous Zoom words. But today I'm excited to share with you all some stories and highlights about how Black culture has influenced fashion. I saw in the chat earlier that we have a lot of people from a lot of different places all around the world. So hoping that I can share some new things with you, some things that you may not have already heard of. And if you have heard of some of these facts or these people, I'm happy to reiterate that and just keep the representation and the history going. So Black culture has permeated fashion for the longest time ever. I think some of the things that you may think about or that you may even partake in terms of like your dress or your style, how you present yourself to the world, you may not realize that they have their roots or have been made popular by Black communities. So for example, hoop earrings, like the ones I have on today, baby hairs, acrylic nails, streetwear, logomania, like elaborate clothing choices, hats, all of these fashion styles have their roots in the Black community. And the influence of Black culture on fashion did not just begin with what we think of as recent trends. I know fashion tends to be cyclical. And so if we look on social media or in magazines, we start to see things pop up that have been around or that were popular maybe in the 80s or the 90s, and they find its resurgence, especially among Gen Z. But the influence of Black culture didn't just begin, in those eras in the 90s or, the early 2000s, but Black pioneers have really been making significant contributions to the industry and changing the way that we view and use fashion since 1800s. And I will even say well before the 1800s, when you think back to American history and the history of Black people in America, many of the enslaved Black people were really the trendsetters and the pioneers of fashion. And when I say that, I mean, the enslaved Black women, really their responsibility or some of their responsibility and their task was to be dressmakers for the families that owned them. And so they really were setting what the style was at the time, which is a way that you may not think about it. But from there, a lot of Black people and Black communities have grown into formatting fashion and continuing to lead the way of fashion. And we're going to get into some of those things and some of those people. I love focusing on trends and general ways that Black culture has influenced fashion, but I think it's important to highlight specific people. It's always great to attach a name to something. That's how we increase representation. That's how we learn more. And that's how we can really give credit where credit is due. So I'm going to share a few people, a few Black pioneers that hopefully are new knowledge to you all and share how they have changed the way, we view fashion. So I thought it apt, going a little faster than I intended. Okay, there we go. So I thought it important to start as we think through the influence of Black culture and fashion, to really start with Ann Lowe, who is noted as the first African-American fashion designer. So she wasn't the first ever Black person to design clothes. As I mentioned before, we've been designing and making clothing, for the longest time ever, but she really is the first Black person to make clothes as a designer in the way that we know it today. So have a line and, those lines be attributed to her, that kind of thing, and to be recognized on an international level. So she was known for designing for many of the aristocratic high society women. That's what she specialized in. So for the Rockefellers, the Kennedys, these are the people that she designed for, and everyone was in love with the gowns that she made. She was known for the embroidery and her flowers that she would put on garments. That was her specialty. And many of her clothing, if not all of her clothing, was hand sewn, formal gowns, things that you would wear to the Oscars, a cotillion, all of those things that high society women would tend to take part in. In 1946, she designed the dress that actress Olivia de Havilland wore to accept her Academy Award for the Best Actress, and you can see that in the corner. And then she also, and I think the thing that she is most famous for, and if you know who she is, this is probably what you know her for, is for designing both the wedding dress and the bridesmaids dresses for Jackie Kennedy, while she was Jackie Onassis and she was marrying Senator Kennedy. And that is really one of the ways that she kind of paved the way for fashion today. I mean, anyone that follows U.S. history in terms of presidents and first ladies knows that Jackie Kennedy was known for her style, and it didn't just start when she entered in the White House, but it started here. And part of that was due to designers, Black designers, especially like Ann Lowe, who helps craft her signature look with her wedding gown and the gowns of her bridesmaid dresses. And even the designer Christian Dior named Ann Lowe as his favorite designer and a designer that he gained inspiration from. And so that's just one way that Black people and Black culture have started to shape the representation of fashion, and not just fashion, but luxury fashion. Another notable Black pioneer in influencing fashion as we know it today is Zelda Wynn Valdes. Like Zelda Wynn Valdes was a designer that, excuse me, really focused in on like celebrating and admonishing the curvy silhouette of women. That was what she was known for. When you think of people like Marilyn Monroe, Ella Fitzgerald, Dorothy Dandridge, Josephine Baker, those very feminine, very sexual looks of women because they were showing off their curves. This is the style that she was known for and what people came to her for. She was instrumental in crafting the image of Joyce Bryant. And for those of you who do not know Joyce Bryant, who's pictured in the corner with the blue gown, she was known as the Black Marilyn Monroe. But when she started in the industry as a singer, her style was completely different. She was very timid, very close to something that you would see like a gospel singer wear, very reserved. But Zelda Wynn Valdes pretty much revamped her image and created this blonde bombshell look, and which tags her as the Black Marilyn Monroe, because that was the style that Zelda Wynn Valdes was most known for. And because of that style, she was tapped by, Hugh Hefner to create the original Playboy bunny waitress outfits look. So again, like the corset, showing off the curvy silhouette of women with the bunny ears. And that look pretty much took over the 1940s, the 1950s era, because of Black designers like Zelda Wynn Valdes who made it a part. And part of the reason why it was so important to celebrate these curvy silhouettes of women is because, those were the bodies that she was used to. Like she was used to seeing Black women who were shaped a certain way, and she wanted to make sure that they felt good and they felt sexy in their clothing, and that shape became part of the standard of beauty, and was celebrated. And so these women did not feel bad for looking that way. She was also instrumental in ballet and the art form of ballet. She designed exclusively for the Dance Theater of Harlem up until her death in 2001. And one of the things that she was notable for was really something as simple as, making sure the tights match the dancers. That's still a problem today. There are a lot of companies that have been created in recent years, exclusively catering to different skin tones and creating different skin tone types. But that's something that Zelda Wynn Valdes, found important and that she took pride in, and making sure that Black dancers had the opportunity to present the art form of dance in the best way possible. And they had all of the options that their white counterparts had, down to, having tights that matched them. She was also instrumental in forming the National Association of Fashion and Accessories Designers to help elevate other Black designers and to fight against discrimination in the industry and to provide some much needed diversity. When we think about other ways that Black culture has impacted fashion, I think one of the things that people tend to put their hands on or can readily access is, how hip hop culture has seeped into fashion. But another big entity in Black culture that has also kind of paved the way for the things that we take part in fashion today is also the Black church. And that brings me to Milliner, which is the hat maker, Mildred Blount, and the hats that she designs that were heavily inspired by the things that you would see many Black parishioners wear on Sunday mornings, Black women especially, with their hats. They're huge hats that were kind of like an art form of their own. And she is the milliner behind all of the looks of Scarlett O'Hara in the movie Gone with the Wind. At the age of 19, Mildred Blount had the opportunity to design the headwear of all of the bridesmaids of Madam C.J. Walker's granddaughter in her wedding, and this led her to be designing more hats hats as a way of an art form, and showcasing in different exhibits in New York, and gaining a role and the opportunity to design for Gone with the Wind. Now, at the time, she didn't get any credit for her work. All of the credit went to her employers, but today we know her as being the one responsible for this look, and much of this look and looks in general, in terms of hats and couture hats, are inspired by, Black women like Mildred Blount, Black grandmothers and moms that go to church on Sunday morning and they show up in their Sunday's best. She was also the first Black person to be admitted to the Motion Pictures Costume Union. Again, another designer advocating for more Black professionals in the industry to make sure that they're getting the credit that they deserve as they do this work, and making sure that there's more space for other Black professionals. Now, Stephen Burrows is a designer from the 60s, late 60s, mostly 70s and 80s era of fashion. And that's where he really made his mark on fashion and on some of the trends that we know today. So like color blocking, that was a big thing and a big part of Stephen Burrows' identity when it came to fashion. So he was like the father of color blocking, the father of bright colors and jerseys. And, he invented the lettuce hem. And on the photo of the model with the veil, you can see an example of what a lettuce hem is, if you're not sure what I'm talking about, but it's that ruffled hem look that was very popular around this time, and then kind of made its resurgence back again in the 90s. And I think in some parts it's making a resurgence again, but he is the one who created that, and that just simply took over his fashion, but that became his signature look. He used to do the hems with a red thread, and everyone would know that as a Stephen Burrows look. He was actually also the only Black designer in the Battle of Versailles. And the Battle of Versailles is such a pivotal moment in fashion history, and American fashion history especially, is because it was a time where the American designers went head to head with European designers. And in the 70s, European designers were considered the pinnacle of fashion. Like, America was not known for fashion. If you wanted fashion, you would go to Italy, you would go to France, and those were the fashion meccas. But America was looked at as not having its own style or even being in the same conversation. And so the Battle of Versailles was the moment where essentially American designers battled European designers for that respect. And Stephen Burrows was the only Black designer in the Battle of Versailles, and he really helped usher the Americans to victory over the European designers. Like, he came in and put America on the map, and kind of showed European fashion professionals in the industry that America does have style. This is what we're working with. This is what our style looks like. It's not just a knockoff of French fashion or Italian fashion. It's our way, and it's our way of doing things. And he did that by showcasing some of his signature styles, like the lettuce hem, his bright colors, these slinky dresses, and also showcasing Black models. Many Black models like Pat Cleveland and Beth Ann Hardison walked the runway, during the Battle of Versailles. And that even caught the attention of many European design houses because of how extravagant and how much style and personalities these models had that they just were not used to seeing. And since then, people, they wanted more Black models, and they want to incorporate more Black models into their shows. Even Givenchy started a Black model cabine where he hired Black models from America and pretty much used them in all of his shows. And they did kind of like a tour of Europe. And that is just, a little bit of the influence that Stephen Burrows had in fashion, in the fashion industry worldwide, just from presenting at the Battle of Versailles and having his own style and honoring his people. I can never get this clicking thing right. Now, speaking of models, the Grandassa models were a group of models that, different from what you would see on a Paris runway or any kind of high fashion runway, but still, very instrumental in shaping some of the trends that we see in fashion today. So the Grandassa models were created by Ilombe Brath, who is the co-founder and lifelong president of the African Jazz and Art Society and Studio. And that was a collective of artists, from illustrators to musicians to models, designers, who really worked together to promote Black culture and celebrate Black culture. And that's how they created the Grandassa models. They wanted to have something that combated the standards of beauty at the time. Many Black women were straightening their hair and just conforming to things that they saw in the magazine. And they thought it was really important to celebrate the natural beauty of Black women, how our hair naturally grows, some of the features that we may naturally have, and to show that as beautiful. They were the originators of the Black is Beautiful movement, and really worked to change what was considered a standard of beauty for the Black community, so that Black cultures just weren't engulfed with looking like something that they didn't naturally look like. So they would host fashion shows around the country, wearing clothing designed by Black designers, clothing inspired by, African countries, and clothing inspired by the Black diaspora, Africa and the Caribbean, and encourage people to partake in that. And we see some of that today when we look at some of these mainstream fashion houses, or even like local designers today, how they're incorporating more of these bold prints, these wax prints, these African prints. All of that comes from, people like the Grandassa models, Ajas and Ilombe Brath, who thought it was important that above all else to make sure that our culture was being seen in fashion and that we understood it and saw it as beautiful. When Rihanna first dropped her clothing line, I don't know if anyone remembers, because it was a little bit of a while back and it ended up closing down, but Rihanna had a high fashion clothing line. She was actually the first Black woman to have a high fashion clothing line under the LVMH house, so Louis Vuitton Moet Hennessy, the conglomerate that owns Louis Vuitton. And the first drop of her collection was inspired by the Grandassa models. It paid tribute to her homeland, but also to the image that she wanted to communicate, which was she wanted to celebrate Blackness. She wanted to celebrate Black beauty, the standards of beauty, and really have that available to everyone, and make sure that everyone was uplifting that ideal as well. And still on the modeling or standards of beauty forefront, we have Eunice Johnson and the Ebony Fashion Fair. Now, Eunice Johnson was the co-founder of Johnson Publishing Company, and that's the parent company to Ebony Magazine and to Jet Magazine as well. But what she was really known for was her personal style and Ebony Fashion Fair. Ebony Fashion Fair was a traveling fashion show across the country where that would celebrate, Black models and Black designers. And it started off, just as a way to raise money for local Black colleges, local schools, hospitals, and nonprofit organizations. But it kind of grew to be this huge explosion of a show that people look forward to. It focused on showcasing Black models like Pat Cleveland and Black designers like B. Smith, Patrick Kelly, and Stephen Burrows, which we mentioned earlier. But it also came to be the place where really avant-garde and haute couture fashion could be seen from European brands like Yves Saint Laurent, Christian Lacroix, Oscar de la Renta, Valentino, etc. So what would happen is, at the time, the elaborate haute couture style clothing just wasn't celebrated in fashion. So designers like Givenchy and Valentino, they would, approach fashion as art, because it is their art, and they would make things with feathers and draping and just elaborate styles of clothing as an expression of, their art form or whatever vision they had in their head. But because it wasn't popular in fashion at the time, it's not something they could sell to boutiques. It's not something that would even go past their runway sometimes. Sometimes it wouldn't even things that they could show on their runway, because it didn't exactly go with what was accepted in the collection at the time. But Eunice Johnson, because she had such an affinity for fashion, she would travel around the world and be able to meet designers. And that's the stuff that she loved, like the things with the feathers, the things that were outrageous. That's what she wanted. That's what she loved. And that's what she wanted to showcase in the fashion fair. So for many of the Ebony Fashion Fair shows, they were opportunities for even these really famous European designer brands to showcase fashions that were never before seen, to showcase their artwork in an environment that could be celebrated, because traditional fashion at the time did not celebrate that. So if you ever go to the African American Museum at the Smithsonian, or go to an Ebony Fashion Fair exhibit, they tend to have those every so often. Some museum will pop one up. You'll be able to see like some very unique designs for some of the well-known French and Italian designers that you may not even know existed, because the only place that you could find that was at, this Black fashion show held by Eunice Johnson. And due to her efforts with the traveling fashion show, she was able to raise over $60 million for a variety of Black organizations and continue to pour into her community. And of course, after seeing the popularity of some of these haute couture designs and some of the designs of these Black designers, other places began adopting that. Other places wanted to showcase that in their magazines. They wanted to showcase that in their boutiques. And it just shows, like, again, how Black culture really does set the trends for fashion sometimes. And thanks to pioneers like Eunice Johnson, thinking outside of the box and really staying true to who they are and their expression and their personality, and how they're able to pave the way and change the landscape because of that. Another one of my favorite Black pioneers in fashion is Willie Smith. And I think we can all look at Willie Smith as the grandfather of many of the things that we see today. So he was just a pioneer in sportswear and streetwear fashion. He was the first designer to create women's wear and menswear under one label. He's also one of the most successful, if not the most successful, Black fashion designer in history at the time of his death in 1987. And he was just known for what we call, or what do you like to call, street couture, which is really the predecessor of streetwear fashion. So if you think of brands like Fear of God and Supreme, Off-White, before any of that happened, there was Willie Smith Street Couture, which was the idea of merging high fashion and what is accepted in the fashion industry with the style and the culture of the people, really. And also mixing highs and lows. Like, think of today, if you look on TikTok or Instagram or whatever, there are people you'll see, they'll be wearing Zara, but they'll also be wearing Prada at the same time, or like a Christian Dior jacket over a Fashion Nova dress. This idea of mixing high and low is something that we've come accustomed to, but at the time of Willie Smith designing, that was unheard of. And so he loved to blur the lines between high fashion and affordability. And that was his big thing. And that is what kind of led to the idea of street couture, which eventually morphed into streetwear fashion. He is also a trailblazer in the concept of collaborating between artists, performers, and designers. So today we see collaborations between like Gucci and Balenciaga, or we'll see a collaboration between an artist and a brand. Like, one time Pharrell did a collaboration with Chanel. Those types of things are made possible and are more popular now because of Willie Smith. Like, he would always look to collaborating with artists, whether that was musical artists or performers or dancing, in order to create collections that spoke to the style of the people and then was affordable for the people to engage in. He also merged fashion with art and music performance. So if any of you watch like Rihanna's fashion show on Amazon Prime, that is essentially what a Willie Smith show would look like. It would be clothed, it would be a presentation. So there's clothing, there's art form, there's dancing, there's music. And that was something that wasn't really done. Fashion for a long period of time just had a way of doing things and stuck to it and expected everyone to fall in line and check off the box. And Willie Smith really did step out of that box to create art that people could connect with and could be able to afford to purchase. He was the first designer to make his presentations on videotape. So pretty much going on location somewhere, using that location as part of the presentation for his designs, and then packaging up, and then that being what is shown. I think the sketches that I have here are an example of a piece from a presentation that he filmed when he went to Senegal and put together this artistic performance, made sure it was recorded, sort of like a music video if you think about it, and make that his presentation for his line. And all of that mixed together just really is what kind of led him to be not only so popular, but so successful at the time, because people could really connect with his work and then actually be able to afford it. And I think that's the piece that fashion misses sometimes, is the affordability. And I would like to say Dapper Dan can kind of be considered as a son of Willie Smith in terms of, carrying on the idea of street couture and morphing it into the things that we see today. So a lot of people are maybe familiar with Dapper Dan due to like the social media blowout that happened a few years ago, 2018, I believe, where Gucci did was it Gucci? Yes, Gucci did a runway show and used some of his designs. This one in particular, this design of the Louis Vuitton jacket, the fur jacket with the puff sleeves. And people were tagging Dapper Dan and, he didn't have social media at the time, but people were tagging the brand and like admonishing them to give credit where credit is due. So Dapper Dan is basically a couturier, and he was known as the king of knockoffs. But what he really did was kind of take, again, that idea that I talked about with street couture and Willie Smith, was take high fashion and blend it with the culture of the people. So he was very popular in the late 80s and the 90s, whereas the resurgence, that's the same time as the resurgence of hip hop. And what you had was a boom of people, Black people in particular, who had money and wanted to spend money because they were famous now. They were rappers, they were actors, they were dancers. So they wanted to wear the name brand clothes, but not in the style that's sold in the store. Like they didn't want to wear Louis Vuitton as it is, because that didn't represent them or their culture or their style. So Dapper Dan would take these logos and create styles that made sense for hip hop, that made sense for Black culture, that made sense for the people. So he would rework these traditional luxury pieces, and that's how he came up with this design on the coat. He even made things for many celebrities today, like Floyd Mayweather, Malcolm Jamal Warner, who plays Theo on The Cosby Show. All of these people would go to him to create something new, but in a style, but with fabric and logos, that kind of can show their upward mobility. So, and he started what we know today as the logo mania trend. So wearing logos everywhere on everything. I don't know if you guys remember in the 90s and like 2000s where like people would have Gucci car seats and all that other stuff. All those things could be attributed to Dapper Dan. And then what started happening is years later, in the 2010s, 2020s, you would have these fashion houses now see the styles, the streetwear styles that people are gravitating towards, the streetwear styles of some of these quote unquote knockoffs look, and start to recreate that, because that's what the people want, that reflects the culture. Like Gucci didn't used to sell puffer jackets. They didn't used to do streetwear. Louis Vuitton didn't used to put graffiti on their bags, but they started doing that after seeing, the popularity of that in hip hop culture, after seeing the things that Dapper Dan was doing, after seeing how Black culture was really reworking some of what we thought of as like high fashion brands and styles. And then they started figuring out how to package that so they could sell it back, to the community. And then outside of streetwear, I do want to highlight Amsala Abira, because she, in another way, kind of disrupted the fashion industry and the bridal industry in particular. Fashion is one thing, and it's in terms of how inclusive and open the industry is, but bridal is a whole nother thing. And it's much more limited in terms of inclusivity. But Amsala Abira was one of the most sought after bridal designers during her time. And she created this look of the modern wedding dress at the time when she was getting married in 1985. And I can't believe how recent that is in terms of style, but she could not find a dress that embodied that modern look. So that structured silhouette, plain, kind of very clean and classic look. But all she could find at the time was like big poofy dresses, like a mermaid shape, those kinds of things. But she really wanted something different, so she created it for her own self. And then the following year, she launched her label and introduced the modern wedding dress. And that's the look that you see on the left with the models with the gloves. She introduced the modern wedding dress into the bridal fashion industry. And that was not a look that had been seen at all at the time. Bridal was supposed to be over the top. Bridal is, the one day where the day is all about you. So you're supposed to look like a princess. You're supposed to look like a celebrity, like it's your cotillion. But modern, sleek silhouettes was not appreciated at the time. But she introduced that into the industry and really disrupted it. Because if you think about weddings now, a lot of people are getting their gowns custom made, but for a very long time, I would say right before the popularity of custom made gowns was the popularity of modern gowns, like structured silhouettes, like bows, sleek styles, plain in terms of like no embroidery or beading. Like that was very popular at the time, and that's because of Amsala Abira. And she dressed celebrities like Halle Berry, Julia Roberts, Selma Hayek. Her gowns were even in movies like Runaway Bride, The Hangover, 27 Dresses, and so much more. But she really was a staple in the fashion industry and changing the way that we look at bridal. And to this day, there aren't a lot of Black bridal designers or Black designers in general who can say that they disrupted an industry and brought in a new look that remained at the height of its popularity for years and years to come. So that was just a very brief overview of how Black culture and certain Black people specifically have contributed to the fashion industry and really dictated what was popular, where this trend went. That is by no means a conclusive discussion, because I can talk ad nauseum for how Black culture has influenced fashion. There are so many more people, there are so many more things out there, and there are so many more ways. So I do encourage you all to do some research and dig in a little bit more if this topic is interesting to you, so you can discover more people and learn more things. But I think one thing that's important for us to take away as we think about the influence of Black culture on fashion is really how can we continue to support that influence in a way that's beneficial to a group. Representation is very important, because it's through representation that communities are built, that people are given credit for their work, and that they're able to continue their livelihood. Really, like less than 2% of brands that are stocked in retailers are Black owned or founded. And that's a current fact. That's not from years ago. That's from today, 2023, that you can walk into any store and less than 2% of those brands are going to be Black owned or founded. So considering all that I've discussed in terms of how Black culture and people have changed the world, it's a little bit crazy to think that, there still isn't space in the industry, or space hasn't been made in the industry for Black people to exist. But organizations are making a better commitment to diversity and to making sure that there is increased representations of all people groups, and Black groups especially. Retailers like Saks and Nordstrom, they even have a Black owned and founded section on their website. So people are making strides, and I encourage you as well to support Black designers and Black fashion creators and pioneers. And some of the easy ways that you can do that is by buying from Black designers. As I mentioned, you can go to major retailers now and they have like a Black owned section, Black founded section, where they highlight these brands that they carry, and you can easily support them. If you go in and you purchase a brand, that tells the retailer that, hey, I need to stock more of this. I need to give more floor room space to this brand or brands like this. And that significantly helps, one, in increasing diversity in the industry, and two, but circulating the wealth in Black communities so that they're able to have, or that we are able to have, better access to some of the things that we have been historically prevented from having access to. Another easy way is our supporting collaboration collections. Affordable retailers like Target, H&M, Zara, and even Amazon are starting to collaborate with Black creatives to produce limited edition clothing lines. Like if you look at Amazon, they have the drop now where they collaborate with Black influencers and sometimes designers to create these collections that they sell on Amazon, and you can get it in 2 days. That's an easy way to continue to show the industry that these stories matter, we matter as people, and to continue to support. You can always, and also, shop local and small. You should always shop local and small. But that's one easy way to really just support your neighborhood Black creative that's trying to make it and trying to tell their story. And then a free and easy way to do it is by supporting Black creatives online by following. Like, you can follow my podcast, you can listen to it, you can subscribe to it, and giving credit where credit is due. If you think back to the names that I mentioned, like Mildred Blunt, who didn't get credit for creating those beautiful hats in Gone with the Wind, or Anne Lowe, the first designer I mentioned, she didn't even get credit for some of her work sometimes. A lot of the stories of Black creatives and people go untold because they are not given the credit that they are due. Their work is attributed to someone else, or they're just ignored in general. You take their ideas and their thoughts and then ignore the people. So it's very important to give credit. And that's really like the number one way and the easiest way to make sure the diversity continues, inclusion continues, and representation is alive, by giving credit where credit is due. And I think I am right on time. So we are about ready to open the floor for some questions.
And I am back. Thank you for that. You shared so much information. I really had no idea, but I had heard of Amsel. Am I saying her name right?
Yes, I'm hesitant because I'm also like, am I saying her name right?
So I've heard of her, the wedding dress designer. So I didn't know of anybody else, which thank you so much for sharing all that information and enlightening us. So yeah, we do have some questions, and I'm about to go through some of the questions right now. Okay, Louise asked, how can you find out if the main retailers have Black-owned designed clothing?
A lot of retailers are starting to create like Black-owned sections. So if you go to their website, you can type in Black owned, or you look in the drop down, it might say Black owned, especially now in February, because it's Black History Month, they tend to highlight and focus on that a little bit more. And you can find the brands that they carry then. If they don't have those sections, then you just got to do a little bit of digging. You might find a Black owned brand online and just kind of poke around and see like where they may be stocked. But you can normally, start with the retailer's website.
Thank you. So Anonymous asked, did I miss mention of Andre Leon Talley? I think I said his name right. And I mean, I've heard of him, right? He was from Vogue. Is that correct? So
yes, that is correct.
Why wasn't he mentioned? And I guess what's his contribution to the fashion industry?
Yeah, so Andre Leon Talley is definitely a legend in the fashion industry. He was the first and only Black male creative director at Vogue. And he was very instrumental in increasing diversity in the industry, highlighting minority designers, not just Black designers, but putting on minority designers in general, like Jason Wu, Laquan Smith. He was also responsible for the resurgence of John Galliano and helping him come back to the fashion industry. So yes, Andre Leon Talley is very instrumental. But like I said, when I was doing my presentation, this is not conclusive. There are tons of people that, I didn't mention. There are tons of people that I could have mentioned. And I really try to focus on people that haven't been in the media so much, or may not be as easily Googleable, to kind of give you more people to add to your repertoire.
Great answer. Thank you. Okay, so Anonymous asked, do you know of any Black-owned brands that practice ethical and fair trade clothing?
I know Black-owned sustainable brands. I don't know if that necessarily means that they're fair trade. So I don't know, but I'll have to take some look at that, because I think that's another issue in the fashion industry that deserves focus and highlighting. So I will have to take some time and research some Black-owned ethical brands, but I'm sure they're out there.
Thank you. Okay, so okay, I'm gonna say this wrong. Something I don't know, Satovia Williams, and I apologize if I butchered your name. Did I? Oh my gosh. Okay.
That's my friend, so I know you said that correctly.
Oh, okay. Oh, well, your friend wants to know. So take some time to think this through, because I feel like you're going to influence your friend's fashion decisions going forward. Who are your top 3 contemporary Black designer must-haves?
Okay, my top 3 contemporary Black designer must-haves. Now, these change seasonally, but right now, in this moment, Hanifa is my number 1. That's Hanifa. She actually, if you follow fashion, you may know her from during the pandemic, where she did a digital fashion show, like a CGI fashion show, which hadn't been done at that point yet. And so that she got a lot of virality and notoriety from that. But the clothes are classic and amazing. Number 2 would be Kai Collective. I think of them as a Black-owned, modern, contemporary, kind of sexy version of Vera Bradley. How Vera Bradley has this iconic print that everyone wanted, and you can just tell Vera Bradley by the print. Kai Collective is kind of like that. They make their own prints, and if you see it going down the street, that's a Kai Collective look. And then my third would be Isela. Now, Isela is actually stocked in Saks. So if anyone's interested in checking them out, they can go to Saks and see Isela. But it's a women-owned sustainable brand. And it's all about women's empowerment, and they are kind of like resort wear, even though now they're slowly moving into other things. But if you're looking for something easy breezy, cute sets that can go from day to night, resort to everyday, Isela is the brand for that. So those are my top 3 contemporary Black-owned designers and brands, and they're all women-owned.
Awesome. Wow, that's so great. I love how you can just think on the spot. So this is a me question to you. How long have you been doing this for that you're just like so good at it?
I've always loved fashion. So I would say my entire life, like I've loved it to the point of like being a nerd over it. So I just research things. I read like the masthead of magazines just to see who is the stylist behind this shoot or who like picked out this look or who designed this thing. Like I've just always been a nerd about fashion. And I just store that information in my brain, I guess.
I wonder what your closet must be insane.
I actually think my closet will probably be underwhelming to most people. I think they come in expecting something and they're like, oh.
Huh. Yeah, I mean, I assumed you have like all kinds of prints and colors in there and just some
Okay,
really
yes,
great
I do have
curated
that.
outfits. Okay, so definitely, yeah, definitely not underwhelmed. Okay, next question. Amina Gwawan asked, and I'm sorry if I pronounced it wrong, I'm doing my best here. Were there any direct connections to civil rights movements from the fashion industry?
Yes, absolutely. So this is a whole another topic that I can do a whole presentation over, but I'll give just a brief overview. Like the civil rights movement of the 60s and the 70s, especially, actually really used fashion as a way to communicate their message. So when you think about like some groups like the Black Panthers and other freedom movements, like their incorporation of either all Black or wearing their hair natural or the incorporation of African prints and style, they really use that to communicate their message of power and strength. And then there are other freedom movements like the Southern Leadership Conference that use kind of the look of like Sunday's Best and more a dressed up look to really communicate their message again of power and strength, but in a different way. And then a lot of civil rights groups also use denim as a way to communicate their message and to really like push for freedom and not just inclusivity, but equity at the time. And denim was associated with sharecroppers. And so they really use that as a way to kind of connect with people and then fight for the rights of the people that came before them and the Black people that came after them. So the civil rights movement and fashion does go hand in hand, and you'll be surprised all of the cool ways that, you know, fashion is used to communicate civil rights and freedom even now. But yeah, that's a whole nother topic. For the person who asked that question, if you're interested in learning more about that, I would suggest that you read Liberated Threads by Dr. Tanisha Ford. It's a great book that kind of deep dives into that concept in general.
Speaking of books, Brianna asked, do you have any Black fashion related books you recommend?
Yes, the one I just mentioned, Liberated Threads by Dr. Tanisha Ford is a great one. There's also the biography of Elizabeth Keckley. She is a Black designer from the 1800s, really, and she wasn't considered a designer then. She was considered a seamstress, but she was very influential in creating the looks of some of the few first ladies of this country. And she wrote a biography about her journey and just fashion in general. And you can hear the ambulance go by. But Elizabeth
You're in New York
biography.
City, right?
No, I'm in Atlanta.
Oh, we did mention this. Okay, sorry. I think I'm just like so excited because I'm going to New York, and that's like what happens when you live in New York. You hear, well, I guess we should have known it was in New York because we only heard the ambulance. If you live in New York, you hear like all three.
Hear everything. Right.
Yeah.
And then there's another book that the title is escaping me, but the author is Lois Lane, which should be easy to remember, like Superman. But Lois Lane was the creator and curator of the Black Fashion Museum. It's now defunct, but most of that collection has gone to the Smithsonian. But she has a great book that's pretty much a a history of like every single, during her lifetime, every single Black fashion designer and professional that you could ever think of. And I don't remember the name of the book, but it's on Amazon. If you Google her, not Google, if you search her name on Amazon, it should be able to pop up.
Thank you. Okay, time for one last question, and this is from Joyce. Do you think FUBU was influenced by Dapper Dan? Sorry.
I think FUBU and Dapper Dan were occurring at the same time. So I think they were probably influenced by each other. I think what both of them were influenced by, which would be the tie between them, is by hip hop culture. And this idea of creating fashion that represented the people who were wearing it. Fashion at the time did not represent Black people or Black culture at all, and certainly not hip hop. Hip hop was such a new genre in the 80s and 90s, and one that they thought was a passing fad, that it wasn't even taken seriously in music and certainly not in fashion. And so I think what Dapper Dan and FUBU both did, because they came from hip hop culture and they came from Black communities, they came from the hood, they really took that and embraced that and mirrored it with fashion. And so that's where you can see some of the similarities, but I think they're happening at the same time. So I'd say they were influenced by each other.
Awesome, thank you. And that's all the time that we have for questions. Thank you so much for submitting your questions, and sorry that we didn't make it through all of them. So Taniqua, thank you so much for today's event. We've really enjoyed having you here. And for those of you that want to stay with Taniqua and stay in touch with Taniqua, we shared the links on chat to her website, as well as where you can follow her on social media. And if you joined late or you'd like to rewatch a recording of this event, we got you covered. You can go to our blog at meetup.com/blog. It's not up yet, but it will be there by end of the week. And before we go, we have a couple slides that we'd like to share. So Meetup is on TikTok. We invite you to follow us at Meetup. We always have some fun and engaging content on there, so go ahead and take a follow. Is that like proper take a follow? I'm so unhip. Okay. And we also have a podcast with our CEO, Keep Connected, our CEO, David Siegel. You can either go on this website link, meetuppodcast.com, or you can scan this QR code where you would get to listen to special guests like Jewel, which helped us celebrate our 2-year anniversary earlier in January, and our recent podcast that launched with Dr. Marissa G. Franco, where she talked about adult friendships. You get to hear from other organizers and other thought leaders about community, connection, and friendships. So for those of you that might have joined us later or that would like to watch a recap of this event, you can at meetup.com/blog. And Taniqua, thank you again so much for joining us today and for helping us celebrate Black History Month. And thank you for everyone that joined us. Have a great day. And if you have beautiful weather wherever you are, please get out and enjoy the day, because I am going to. Bye, everyone.